Okay. Barbara, if something goes wrong with the sound like yesterday, just give me a WhatsApp if you can.
Will
Thank
do.
you. Okay, Sanhedrin. Okay. So we're learning going back a bit, we're learning about the individuals. Three of them are kings, four of them are what we call commoners. Hey Bruce, we're holding page 101, Kuf Aleph Amud Bey's second page. We're starting to learn about mid-page. We're learning about the three commoners, hey Aaron, and the three kings and four commoners who do not have a portion in the world to come. So going back a few lines from last week. So Shaloisha Melachim Va'arba Hedyoitais that don't have a portion in the world to come. Three kings and four commoners. Tan Rabbanan, our rabbis have taught. Now the first one, Yorovam. Yorovam ben Nebat is the first king of the north. Meaning after they divide, we'll learn the story now. How the kingdom from David after the end of Solomon, King Shlomo's rule, was divided into two kingdoms, what's known as the kingdom of Yehuda and the kingdom of Israel, which are the 10 tribes of the north. That remained like that until the exile of the 10 tribes that we learned about in the time of Sanhedrin, in the time of King Chizkiyahu, the king of Yehuda. About 100 years later was when there was the destruction of the temple and the exile of Judah. What's remaining today is what's known as the Jewish people today are from the kingdom of Yehuda. That's the kingdom of the 10 tribes. Whoever made their way back from Yirmiyahu, whoever made their way down south over the years. So that, of course, is not exactly just the tribe of Yehuda, but primarily the tribe of Yehuda and Binyamin. Okay, so Tanu Rabban Yorovam, the first king of Israel. Why is he called Yorovam? So we're going to analyze his name to understand about him. What we're going to learn about Yorovam, he was a fascinating person. At the same time, he had no schus avos. He came from interesting stock, but not necessarily good stock. So Yorovam Shiri Ba'am, he lowered the people down. He brought them down, debased the people. So and also we've learned that Ben Yaakov says that he engaged in homosexuality. Yorovam also, the Gemara says that Sha'asam Riva Ba'am, he made a division, a split in the people. Why? As we're going to learn, he set up idols. Not everyone was pro starting to idol worship. Before that, we're talking about this is going straight from King David, King Solomon, when the Jewish people were at their height, literally at their height from the exodus of Egypt, serving God, the temple, etc. And here he goes and he puts up idols and reintroduces the concept. I say reintroduces because they did serve idols over the days of the judges, but they rid themselves of that. So he brought it back and he made a rivabam, he made a division in the people. So that's again in the name of Yorovam. Davar Acher, another idea is Yorovam Shasim Riva Ben Yisrael Avim Shebeshamayim, that he made division between the Jewish people and our Father in heaven, meaning Hashem. So he brought the people lower, or he divided the people. Meaning to say, it's different. It's different. The differences of the opinion is how we view his name, the effect that he had on the people. One is the effect he had in general on the people, bringing them down, or dividing the people, separating the people from Hashem. Okay. Who is his father? Nebat, ben Nebat. So it says, hey, Shoki, we just start going back a bit on page 101, too. Ben Nevat, Ben Shenibat V'layrad. The word Nevat is an expression of vision. Shenibat V'layrad, he saw, but he didn't properly understand. He didn't properly understand what he was seeing, and he misread the situation. And that again, we're going to see, Rashi is going to explain what that means, that he misread what situation. This is a common theme that we have in Chumash of people who've had kind of a vision of things, were able to see things, but they didn't understand it. And usually, being that they were selfish people, they attribute it to themselves. So let's see, Rashi says over here, Sheriva Am, what does it mean that he brought the people down? Sherivas es Yisrael v'shvilam, he brought them lower. The word shafel. Asam Riva Bam, what does it mean? He made a division in the people. So here, Rivam Elu im Elu, he made an argument between the Jewish people themselves. One person was serving idols, the other person was objecting to idol worship. So there's he made a division in the people. And one of the worst things again in the Jewish people is to cause machlaikas, to cause division. Another idea, shenivat. What is it we're talking about? We're talking about Yorovam ben Nebat. What does it mean, shenivat v'layra? Hayisaver lahabit yafa. He thought he could see well. He thought he was able to read, so to say, between the lines of a situation. V'lamad al davar iker v'layra, and he didn't really see properly. Shata, he made a mistake. Damrin Kamana was about to say, he saw fire coming out of his penis, and he thought that that's a representation of his power, that he's going to be king, as opposed to something that is represented by his children, which Yorovam would be king. So Nevat is a person who oversteps his bounds. And we're going to learn Nevat is a person, the father started off negative, overstepping his bounds. We're going to learn right now who his father is. His father, it's a complicated opinion about how we understand this Gemara because of the time frame, obviously. But we're going to see that in general, the time frame doesn't make a difference at all in most of this Gemara. Tana, we learned. So who's Nevat? So what did he see? It says he saw and he didn't understand. He thought that he was going to be king. So it says who Nevat? He's Nevat. So that's his name. Who Micha? He's also Micha. We're going to learn who Micha was. Who Sheva ben Bichri. And he's also Sheva ben Bichri. Means Nevat, Micha, and Sheva ben Bichri are all the same person. The others say it's not the same person, but that they represented the same ideas. But Rashi learns they are the same person. He's Nevat, Micha, and Sheva ben Bichri. What's Nevat? So Nevat is Shenibat v'layra. Again, he looked and he didn't see properly. He misread the situation, like we said in Rashi. He thought he was going to be great. Who's Micha? So Micha, it says, "Shenismachech bebinyan." Micha is a person who was crushed in the building. What do you mean crushed in the building? We're going to learn. Micha was from the Yotzei Mitzrayim. You have to remember, we're talking about close to 400 years after the Jewish people left Egypt. So if his father is Micha, who is Micha? Micha was a child in the time of slavery, who Moshe Rabbeinu asked God, what's going on? He was placed in the wall as a brick, as an infant. He was placed in the wall as a brick. Moshe says, how are you hurting the children like this? And God said, because I'm getting rid of the bad weeds. He's going to be horrible. And God said, if you don't trust me, take him out of the wall. And he ended up being Micha. What was his first sin? First sin was he took the plate. We learn he took the plate. Rashi teaches us in Chumash. He took the plate, but Moshe threw in the plate into the Nile to get Joseph's ark out, the urn of Yosef. It said Alei Shur, and Micha took that plate. He obviously was a person that was around, and he took that plate from the water. And later, when they built the golden calf, it was Micha who threw the plate into the fire that caused it the golden calf should come out. Alei Shur means from the word shor, because the blessing of Yaakov to Yosef was that he was going to be he's like an ox. And from there came out the golden calf. Later, he comes to Eretz Yisrael and he builds a house of worship. The Gemara tells us later, we're going to learn that Micha had a house of worship in the times of worshiping idols in the times of the Mishkan. So this same Micha is the father of Yorovam. How that worked out is another thing. How Yorovam is the son of Micha, and Yorovam was a great tzaddik at the time. So shenismachich bebinyan, that he was crushed into the building. Like I said, he was placed into the building as an infant. Umash Shmai, and what is his real name? Sheva ben Bichri Shmai. And now that makes things a lot easier. Who's Sheva ben Bichri in history? Sheva ben Bichri is not just a name. So if we're going to look over here, Sheva ben Bichri, I'm going to bring up a little bit over here. It doesn't act up. Okay, so here Sheva ben Bichri comes out in the time of King David. When King David was, like it says over here, it happened that there was a certain baseman whose name was Sheva, the son of Bichri. He was from Binyamin. It's a problem that he was from Binyamin, because if he's the father of Yorovam was from Ephraim, and he blew a shofar, and he said, we have no portion in David, and we have no inheritance in the son of Yishai. Every man to his tents. He sent the Jewish people away after the uprising of Avshalom. Sheva ben Bichri went and tried to start another rebellion, thinking that he would be king. What happened? So after Sheva ben Bichri went and started a rebellion, David sent Yoav, his general, to the city of Avela. And what happened was, in Abel, and they built a ramp, and they basically wanted to destroy the whole city. He was taking refuge in this city. So the woman came out. Who was the woman? The Gemara says the woman was Sarah, the daughter of Asher. Sarah, the daughter of Asher, ended up negotiating a truce with Sarah. Sarah saw Yaakov. So these are a lot of people that lived a long time. She made a truce with Yoav, with David's general, and they killed Sheva and Bichri. Halachically, it became a problem. Why is it a problem? Because we learn that I just want to bring down the Gemara Yishami says that from the story of Sheva ben Bichri we learn that he claimed Sheva ben Bichri said to the Jewish people, "You can't give me back. How are you gonna halachically?" It says, Tani, we learned, if you meet a person, a group of a goyim want to come and take a group of people and say, "Give me one of you, or we're going to kill you all." So you can't give one Jewish person. You have to all die. If they say, "Give us you, this specific person," could go in Sheva ben Bichri, then you could give him, and you don't have to all die. And Reb Shimon ben Lakish says that that's only in the case where the person is Chayv Misa, like Sheva ben Bichri, because he rebelled against David. Rabbi Yochanan says even if he didn't rebel. But what do we see from this? From the Gemara, we see that Sheva ben Bichri, just to go back who he was, Sheva ben Bichri rebelled against David. Yoav came and laid siege to the city and said he's going to kill the entire city unless they give Sheva and Bichri. Sarach ben Asher negotiated. They killed Sheva and Bichri. They cut his head off and threw it out to Yoav. From here we learned, and Sheva and Bichri argued. He said, same argument later, we're going to learn one of the kings of Yehuda made that same argument and said, you can't give back one person. You have to all die to protect each other. Nevertheless, they let Sheva Bichri go because he was rebellious according to Rish Lakish. Okay, so what Rashi is going to tell us? Who's Micha? Nismachech bebinyan shel Mitzrayim. He was in the buildings of Egypt. Shnasnu bebinyan b'makim levayna. Those days, Paroi, one of the decrees was if they didn't have enough bricks, they would take a child. This is like what's going on in Hamas, unfortunately. Horrible people. They would take a child and stick it into the wall instead of the brick. Can the farish by God that's brought down the medrash? God said, Moshe said to God, you're making it horrible for the people. If they don't have any bricks, they're placing the children into the walls. I'm weeding out the thorns because these children, if they would live, they would end up being wicked. If you don't trust me, take out one of the children. We took out one of the children. He took out Micha. And what happened? Micha ended up becoming a pillar of destruction for the Jewish people. First, he was involved in the golden calf, and then he literally put up a house of worship and done. Lashon Acher means nismachich asek bebinyan achin nasa machida kedamrin and kol isek binyan mismasken. Rashi says another thing. The word nismachich means that he went into construction, and it's brought down in the Gemara Saita. People go into building and they're becoming from the word mach poor. So he became poor from building. Doesn't say what he was building. Okay. So here, Rabbi Steinsaltz is going to bring the opinion that it's not the same person. Again, what's the complication if it's the same person? It's the complication if it's the same person. Number one is we just said Sheva ben Bichri was from Binyamin, and Yorovam ben Nebat was from Ephraim. That we know clearly. And also the time is, he means Micha, Sheva ben Bichri, Nevat, all one person seems complex. So here he says, Rabbi Steinsaltz says, some explain that here and in other places, when this formulation appears in the Gemara, the sages are not intimating that the individuals mentioned here are all the same person. Rather, their actions were similar, and consequently, it is as though they were one person. Therefore, it's possible to derive details about one from one of the verses written about the other. So basically, the Ein Eliyahu says not the same person, but their personalities were so similar that we could learn from each other. But from Rashi, we're going to see in a second, Rashi learns that it was all the same person. It literally was Sheva ben Bichri. It doesn't say about Micha, but it definitely says that it was Sheva ben Bichri. The Yad Ramah also is a little concerned. He says, how could Micha have lived so long? He's from the times of leaving Egypt all the way to after the days of David. Okay. So now the Gemara continues. The Gemara continues. Taner Rabbanan, our rabbis have learned. Shloisha nibtu v'layro. So what do we say fundamentally? So we know Yorovam caused division, either between the Jews, he caused division everywhere. His father, Nebat, he didn't see properly. 2, he was Micha, which means he built idols. And 3, he was Shevim and Bichri, he rebelled against David. So we have idol worshippers, people who are egotistic and rebellious, all in the same person, Nevat. That's who his father was. So he had no yichus. He didn't come from good stock that he deserved to be king. He was supposed to be the king instead of Solomon's son Rechavam. So Taner Rabbanan, Shloisha nibtu v'layro. Now we're going back to Nevat. There are 3 people who saw but didn't see properly. Who are these? Elohei, Nevat, the father of Yorovam. Achitophel, call him the advisor of David / enemy, Russia, etc. The Rashi brings down every time in Rashi they quote Achitophel we know about Achitophel besides from the Navi, it's brought down in Preke Chelek. David learned from Achitophel. He was a huge Talmud Chacham. He knew everything. He was the smartest man in the room. He was also David's father-in-law. He was the father of Bathsheba. Nevertheless, he was rebellious. He was the one who was behind Avshalom's rebellion against David. So again, we're talking about very complex times and complex people, because you're talking about great people. Yorovam was a great person, but at the same time, they're horrible people. And also, the third peoples that made a mistake in what they thought they understood was the Dagnine Paroi. The astrologers of Paro also made a mistake. Because what we learned this many times, the Mei Meriva. So what we're going to learn in a second. Nevat, what was Nevat's mistake? So like Rashi quoted before, he gave us a hint. So it says, Roya Eish Yoitzim Amasai. He saw a fire coming out of his penis. Usavar Ihu Malech. Thought that was a sign that he would become king. V'loihi, and it was a mistake. He didn't see properly. Why? It was Yorovam who did not fik minau. It was Yorovam who was a descendant from him. And that was why the fire came from there, where the children are born. So he misread the situation, and therefore he caused the rebellion with Sheva ben Bichri. That's what the Rashi says. Who savar ihu malach? He thought he would be king. V'chein it's amitz Sheva ben Bichri. Therefore he got. The question is if Sheva ben Bichri is Micha, it seems so unlikely unless he did tshuva. Like how would he? Micha was literally a person that had a house of idols next to Shiloh. He was an idol worshiper, a known idol worshiper. It wasn't like he was a undercover Russia. He was a known Russia. How did he all of a sudden become Sheva ben Bichri and be part of the peoples of David that he should even think he should become king? Either way, who savri you malach l'chenis amitz Sheva ben Bichri v'kibbutz kol Yisrael. Therefore, Sheva ben Bichri gathered the Jewish people. He loved himself, but he writes Limlech, and he wanted to become king, even though he advised that it should be a rebellion against David. But he figured that through one way or another, it's going to end up benefiting himself to become king. Okay. Well, the question is why, when he sees fire coming out of himself, does he think that's king? So there was the commentaries discuss why this would be indicating that they would be king. But we'll see that the same thing happened to Achitophel. Who is Achitophel? Achitophel's then, by the way, he committed suicide. He was the one who was advising the son of David, Avshalom, to rebel against his father. Achitophel, also, he sees leprosy on his penis. He thought the sign of leprosy would be that he's going to be king. We'll see why. What's the connection to leprosy? And that was the mistake. It was, again, he wasn't seeing properly. He thought that he would be king, and really was Bathsheba Bita, his daughter Bathsheba, who marries David. David marries her, right? This famous story of David and Bathsheba. Who did not come in Shlomo? And what he really was seeing, he was seeing royalty, but it wasn't his royalty. It was the royalty of his grandson, King Solomon. Again, what we see about all these peoples is that their story remains, right? Nevat is not king, but his story remains negatively. Achitophel, clearly a Russia, his story remains, his daughter's Bathsheba, a pivotal person in the story of David, and of course the mother of King Solomon. That means Mashiach comes from Achitophel. right? According to the Rambam, Mashiach has to be a descendant of King Solomon's, meaning to say that Achitophel is the ancestor of Mashiach. So you have dealing with very complicated people here. So he says, Iyu Malach, he thought he would be king. Therefore, he went against David. I mean, at one point, he was David's advisor. The Gemara tells us that whenever they needed to know what to do, he was like the smartest man in the room. David knew he was trouble. That's also a question why he kept him around. He became an advisor to Avshalom, the son of David, who rebelled against his father. He figured that Avshalom would win his father, and he almost did. It was a crisis by the Jewish people. It wasn't so simple that David beat Avshalom. He figured one way or another, from there, it would roll and he would end up become king. Meaning, it does. What Rashi is addressing is that if he sees that he's going to be king, why would he go and advise? How does it help by causing a rebellion with the son to become king? But he figured once he destabilizes the house of David, he could come in and get rid of Avshalom evidently again as well, and become king. It says before, I just want to say about the tzaras that he saw. It says they saw tzaras. What would tzaras mean? That he figured that it's what he saw. The tzaras was connected to actually something to do with him, because it says that basically that I don't know. I never seen this. The Marsha quotes that David was punished with tzaras after the story of Bathsheba. So he knew that there was some sort of connection of royalty and the leprosy. He just didn't, again, what the Gemara is saying is these are people who are seeing things, but they're not understanding it properly. And what happened is that it says over the Marsha quotes that David was stricken with tzaras, with leprosy after the story of Bathsheba for 6 months. Okay, we know that one of the kings that had tzaras, Uzziah, had to leave the throne. I'm not sure how that didn't affect David, but I'm not familiar with that, so we'll have to check it out. Okay, either way, so there's two people that made a mistake in what they saw. One was Sheva ben Bichri. He thought he would be king. It was his son Yorovam. The next one was Achitophel, thought he would be king. Was his grandson Solomon. Now the next one is Atztanigei Pari. What's the story with the astrologers of Pari? The Amr Rab Chami bar Chanina, but this Rashi quotes this over and over again. The Rab Chami bar Chanina says, "Ma'ay d'chsiv." What does it mean? Hema mei meriva. When we talk about Moses and Aaron not going into the land, it says these are the water. These are the waters of contention. What do you mean the waters of contention? What are we talking about? As if we should know what these waters are. Hema shiro istagnine parivato. This is the astrologers of Pari knew that Moshe would get harmed by water. They just didn't know what they were seeing. So therefore, what did they say? They saw that the king, the redeemer of the Jewish people, will be affected, plagued damaged by water. So what they tell Paroi? Make a decree that all the firstborns, all the sons have to go into the Nile. That was the decree, throwing the boys in the Nile. Why? Because they figured that's what they're seeing, that he's going to be destroyed by the water. But they made a mistake. That what's going to happen is the story of the water. What's the story of the water? When Moshe, at the end of the 40 years, after Miriam dies and the well dries up, so the Jewish people want water, God told Moshe to talk to the rock. Moshe he spoke to the wrong rock, and therefore he hit the rock. And because he hit the rock, he was punished. And God tells him over and over again, because you didn't listen to me, therefore you didn't go into the land. So the astrologers saw that there was a connection between water and Moshe being affected. Like he would get so to say, he would get damaged, so to say, stricken by the water. But what was it? It was that he wouldn't go into the land, but not that he'd be thrown into the Nile. So Rashi quotes, Amei Meriva, Sheba Oven Sha'amar Shimuna Amoirim Nenesh V'Nichnas La'aretz Yisrael. When he started to speak and then he hit the rock, therefore he didn't go into Eretz Yisrael. So again, another group of people that saw something but they didn't see right. Again, these are if you stop for a second, you were just reading it. But if you stop for a second and think about it, these are a lot of these things that are kind of complex, because if he was thrown in the Nile and they saw that, he obviously wouldn't be the Redeemer, right? You can't throw an infant in the Nile at the same time he's the Redeemer. That doesn't work. it doesn't, their logic doesn't make sense, right? Because what actually happened makes sense. He did redeem the Jewish people. He led them through the desert. He gave them the Torah. He just didn't enter the land because he hit the rock at the end of the 40 years and he didn't speak to the rock. But by throwing him into the water, then he obviously wouldn't be the Moshe in Yisrael. Maybe they were seeing that he's the potential redeemer, and there's a connect. He could be damaged by water, and they figured therefore the best thing is to just throw all the children in the water. All right. The Gemara continues. How do we know that Yorovam? Okay, so we know that Yorovam caused division between the Jewish people and God. We're going to get into exactly what he did and what was the core of his issue. His father was obviously a troublemaker. He was Shevim and Bichri, let's say, Nebat. So, but how do we know that he's not going to have a portion in the world to come? That's the subject at hand, right? So, because we have a verse. It says, "Vayhi bedavar hazel achates beis Yorovam." So this is, and so the verse says, and by this matter there was a sin to the house of Yorovam, meaning he wasn't just king. He had a few children that his I think his son and his grandson were kings. And it says to eradicate and destroy from the face of the earth. Will be eradicated from this world. And destroyed means they don't have. There's two. Language of destruction, and those two languages of destruction are attributed to both that his family is not going to rule forever. He was never supposed to rule forever, ever. That was only for David, but he was supposed to have, I guess, a longer rule. But he would nevertheless, that didn't come out. He was destroyed, and his family was destroyed, and also for the Hashmid means to be destroyed for the world to come. So the Gemara says, how do we know Yorovam doesn't have a portion in the world to come? Of course, we're going to address this on all the people that we're quoting. How do we know that they don't have a portion of the world to come? We're not just saying it. Okay. So now we know that, again, we're gonna get into now the complex story of Yorovam. I just want to give a little background before we go into Yorovam. The story we have Saul's the first king. Okay. David becomes king. That's the house of David. You have to remember the tradition by the Jewish people was, and this is all the way back from the tribes as they were individuals, that from Yehuda comes Malchus, comes kingship. So much so that's very complex. You can't have that. One of the reasons the brothers wanted to kill Yosef because they said he was married to Malchus. By saying that everyone's going to bow down to him, that's taking away from Yehuda's being king. Also the blessing that Yaakov gives Yehuda. It's all about David. It's all about Mashiach. The idea of royalty comes from Yehuda. So the idea was that David was going to be the king forever, and his family would be the king forever. Solomon does something wrong, and therefore, because of the promise for David, he only gets one tribe. Again, at the end, that's what we have today. That's the Jewish people. So technically, that is the royalty forever. And for the Jewish people throughout, even years after the destruction of the Second Temple, the house of David ruled. Just not in the way of kings, but the Rosh Galuta, the Nasi, the house of the Nasi were the descendants of Yehuda, of David, and the Rosh Galuta, the person who led the office that led the Jewish people in the exile of Bavel for close to 1,000 years had to be descendants of David. The Rosh Galuta was from the house of David. But nevertheless, Yorovam gets royalty. So he definitely didn't earn it from his father, because his father was Sheva ben Bichri. So what tzchus did he have? What merit did he have to get royalty? So now the Gemara is going to analyze that question. So Rashi explains that's the question. The question is that we know that his father is nobody. So why would he have a portion in the world to come? Sorry, then Yaakov says that. He had no merits of his father's because he's Micha Shev ben Bichri, so he must have had his own merits. Rabbi Yochanan says like this. What worthy thing did Yorovam have about himself that he was worthy to be king, to royalty, to monarchy? So the Gemara answers. Rabbi Yochanan answered, he rebuked King Solomon. If that's the case, so why was he punished? He didn't rebuke him properly. If he would have rebuked him in a respectable way, privately is one thing. He used the rebuke as a way to get an upper hand, and he did it publicly, and therefore he was punished. Again, the Gemara has obviously asked the question. That's obviously not why he was punished. He was punished because he built the golden calves. So I think the Marsha asked the question. that he didn't get a world to come because he started idol worship. But what was the question is, what was his initial problem? Where did things go wrong? Where do we see a lot of times when you analyze a problem, the problem is not what you see. There was a background problem. Where was the background problem with Yorovam? It was his ego. Because he had an ego and he went and he rebuked Solomon publicly, that led to eventually building the calves that he built that ended up being idols and ended up destroying the Jewish people, and because of that, he doesn't get a portion of the world to come. He lifted a hand to the king. Shlomo bone es hamiloi. So it says what happened. King Solomon built the Milo. Sagres Peretzir David Aviv. He closed up the breaches in the wall. David left open walls so that Jewish people could come easily into the city. Amr Lai. So how did he rebuke Solomon? Shlomo, he said, David Avicha, David, your father, Paritz Pratzis B'chayma, Kadesh Yal Yisrael L'regel. He made breaches in the wall so it should be easier for the Jewish people to go up in the holiday. Va'ata Gedarta, so you closed up the breaches. Why? Kadei Lases Angaria Levaspari. One of the things we know that Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh, right? That was a bad thing. I mean, the Gemara doesn't give Solomon, who married, obviously he converted her, Rambam says, but she continued with idol worship. The Gemara teaches us, I think, in Shabbos that Rome came about because Shlomo married the daughter of Paro. So when he married the daughter of Paro, he built her palace, according to most opinions, over the breaches, and made that all the Jewish people had to go basically pay respect to her. And he thought that was this. He thought that Solomon was showing disrespect to the Jewish people, showing disrespect to his father. So the Gemara says, well, his rebuke was right. Shlomo shouldn't have closed the breaches. He shouldn't have built a palace and made everyone pay respect to the daughter of Paroi. But he didn't have to rebuke him publicly. So he rebuked Shlomo. In the Farash Vazal, the Amr David Avicha, like he says, your father made breaches so people could go, and you closed up the breaches. He could have, if he really meant it. So we see about Yorovam is this Rashi's in the word Levaishay. Rashi is telling, the question is what's the problem of rebuking him publicly? So the question is, did he really care, or he just used this as an excuse? Levaishay means he looked to shame Shlomo. If he really meant emes, if he really was bothered that the breaches were closed up, we're going to see he was perfect, the perfect person. Be very wary of the perfect person, right? He was the ultimate scholar, the top student of Ahijah the Shilonite. But he was burning with ego, so therefore he wanted to shame Shlomo. If he really cared about the breaches and he really cared about Bas Paro, he would have pulled him to the side. He would have sent a message. He would have done it in a respectful way. Again, this is why we're trying to figure out that's why it's the sin that's the fundamental part. That's the fuel that drove all the issues that he had. Parts protzes b'chayim kadesh yaluv v'yardu v'yichansu b'revach. David HaMelech made breaches in the wall so the people could go easily into the city. What did it mean? What do you mean he closed it up? So here Rashi says that what did he do? If there was breaches, there would be no consensus of who's entering the city. Everyone would just enter at their own free will. By closing the walls, the breaches up, and forcing people to go through the gates properly, so then there could be guards watching to see who's coming in, and he could collect taxes. And where did the taxes go? He claimed, again, this is all politics haven't changed in 3,000 years. All these narratives of manipulating words to work the people up. He was successful. He worked 10 tribes. It was these things that he did, and later what he did with Rechavam, these were things that he did to work up the people against. And what happened? It was a manipulation. He manipulated the politics. So he was talking about, what did he do? He got the people with the money. Why do you close the breaches? You don't want taxes. Who's it going to? It's not going to good causes. It's going to the daughter of Paroi, right? These jargons and narration hasn't changed. Lashon Achar, another idea is Shesagar Sharm Vasa Migdal Vaspari Al Echad Min Hasharm. That it wasn't so much about the taxes, but he actually built a palace for the daughter of Paro on top of one of the gates. And everyone had to go through that gate. And because he wanted people to pass by and respect her. She stood on the balcony. Angaria means to do things for the king. Lashon Achar, another opinion, Shlomo would lock the gates of the temple. And he had the keys. We know from other stories, King Solomon sometimes would sleep. The king sleeps into 3 hours of the morning. No one could go into the temple. He was holding the keys. And the Jewish people waiting to enter the temple until the king wakes up. Yorovam felt that as disrespectful to the Jewish people. You want us to give respect again. You want us to give respect to the daughter Paris, so you give us the keys. Again, this is the commentaries, of course, explain that King Shlomo was a tzaddik. He didn't mean it that way, but there's a lot of times you find things that you could do. You manipulate the narrative, get people worked up. Everyone gets upset when you throw in the word money. That's very effective, right? So what's it mean? He says, "Hamali achas min process." He filled up one of the breaches. Gader malu l'kaisel ha'chaymer. Banasham migdal of Aspari built a tower for the daughter of Pare. L'nashim sha'ivdim la li'il mahai krag ksiv ayar miad b'melech chaymer kamid varm knever the melech umared by, that he lifted a hand in rebellion against the king. At the end, he didn't become king then. He had to run away after that. Now, officially, he wasn't told by anyone to do this. At this point, when Yorovam is rebuking Shlomo, he has no idea that he's going to be king. This is why he was going to be king, because he rebuked him. Later, when he runs away from King Solomon, he was a general. He wasn't just a nobody. He was an officer. When he runs away from King Solomon, then he's told by the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite he's going to be king. At that point, he was being a zealot, a zealot for God, but a zealot with ego, because he could have done it in a respectful way. And that's why that's why we see that the same qualities he had was actually his downfall. Okay. Now the Gemara asks, we're going to learn an interesting halacha. I just want to say another thing. It says that one of the Mefarshim say over here that about the Yad Ramah says like this. He says, "You can't say that all these things that he was being accused of, Solomon was accused of, was really what he wanted, what Shlomo was thinking." The Yad Ramah says Shlomo was an absolute righteous person. He didn't need the money. Why? The Torah tells us, there was no value to money. That's how wealthy King Solomon was. But Yorovam used it as a way to, again, he used what do they call it today? He used certain languages that would get the people worked up. Paspare, the people weren't happy about that in the first place. Why is he marrying an Egyptian wife? Money, breaches, all these things he was using as point words to get people worked up, and eventually it ended up being the points that helped him in his rebellion. Even though he didn't know that he could be king, but he was looking for trouble. Okay, now but the question is, what does it mean that he lifted a hand to the king? Amar Rav Nachman teaches, this is, we learned the halacha. Tefillah b'fanav. He took off his tefillin in front of the king. You have to remember, first of all, those days, the people wore tefillin the whole day. The only time he didn't wear tefillin is when he went to sleep or had relations or went to the restroom. But otherwise, people walked around the whole day in tefillin. So he took off his tefillin in front of Shlomo, and we'll see why, but that was a sign of disrespect. From this we learn, until today, you're not supposed to take off tefillin in front of a king or a rebbe or your teacher. That's why we don't take off tefillin when the Sefer Torah is out. If this, the custom, the halach is, if the Torah is out in the sanctuary and you're in the room, you shouldn't take off your tefillin. It's disrespectful. Like Yorovam took off his tefillin in front of the king. What we do is you go outside. When you go outside, then you can take off your tefillin. So Rav Nachman Gassis. So that's what he did wrong. Now Rav Nachman's going to say like this: What was the real issue that Yorovam had? I mean, we're talking about a quality person. He had a lot of qualities. He wasn't so to say, a low life. Although his father was Shevim Bichri, Micha, Nebat, all these, so he comes from a complicated stock. We could say he has issues from his background. That you could see that, and trying to show that he's different than his father. There's a lot of psychology that you could analyze Yerovam's behavior. But fundamentally, what he had a problem with is ego. So that's what Rav Nachman says. Amar Rav Nachman, Gasis haruach shahoyaboy. It was the ego that he had. Yerovam To Radutu min ha'olam, took him out of the world. I mean, what took him out of the world to come? What did he lose? Everything. He was gifted. He had the potential to be almost as great as the house of David. What brought him down was his ego. Shenemar, like it says, V'yomer Yorovam b'livoi. The Torah says, the Navi says, the Yorovam, in Kings it says, Yorovam said to himself in his own heart, this is after he becomes king. So he rebels against the son of Shlomo. He has a pointed rebellion. Again, what's his credit to that people listened to him? Because he already opened his mouth against Shlomo. He ran away to Egypt himself, but when he came back, when Rechavam became king, he comes back and he stages a rebellion against Rechavam. Again, it's all money issues. He uses points to get the Jewish people worked up. And Rechavam also wasn't the wisest of people. But either way, Yorovam says to himself in the heart, after he becomes king, he says, what's going to happen? The house of David is going to take back the kingdom. It means he had 10 tribes. The king, the son of Shlomo, Rechavam, his name was, had one tribe, 1.5 tribes, Benjamin, whatever, Levi, a little bit. He had the south. Why? Why was he concerned that he would lose the kingdom? He said, what's going to happen? It's going to come the holiday. Different opinions when did this happen, whether it happened in the Jubilee year, the Shnas Hakel, when he read the Torah, or just in general on Yom Tiv. But he said, now they're going to go, so this is mamish. I mean, you have to understand, this must have happened right after he becomes king. That he says they're going to build, everyone's going to go to the temple, because that's what you have to do. There was no division, there's 2 kingdoms, but everyone goes to the temple, to Jerusalem. V'shav leva amazel d'neim, they're going to go back to their original masters, meaning King David's family. El Rechavam Melech Yehuda, to Rechavam, the king of Yehuda, the son of Solomon. Varguni, me they're going to kill. V'shavu Rechavam Melech Yehuda, everyone's going to go back to Rechavam. Why did he think they're going to go back to Rechavam? We'll see in a second. First, let's see what he did. So he says, Shechalatz tefillin b'fanav, he took off his tefillin, Rashi says, in front of the king. Shahaylai lefanis l'tzad acher, he should have went to the side if he wanted to take off his tefillin. They aim is machuse, because of respect to the king. He shouldn't have taken off his tefillin in front of the king. That was a sign of rebellion. Another idea is chayletz tefillin b'fan of lavoy lehasris kenegdei b'chazaka. He took it off in an aggressive way. What's it mean chayletz tefillin? What's the problem when you take off your tefillin? So you're revealing you're taking off your hat, so to say. You're uncovering your head in front of the king. And he did it consciously to show that he's not king. He doesn't feel, Shlomo doesn't deserve to be king because of the things that he did, that he closed the breaches and he built the palace for the daughter of Paro, etc., and the taxes and all that. Other opinions, the Adramah says he needed to go to the bathroom because one that I did, he was showing such disrespect for David, for King Solomon. If you're standing in front of the king, you wouldn't tell the king I have to go to the bathroom, right? He just did it like to show, because when he took off his tefillin, he would go to the bathrooms. He showed that he literally had no respect for Solomon. So let's see what Rabbi Steinzel says. From here, the sages learned the halacha. From this Gemara, we learned the law. It's prohibited for a student to remove his phylacteries, his tefillin, in the presence of his teacher. The same thing applies to the Sefer Torah. There's a dispute with regard to the reason for this prohibition. Some hold that it is due to the fact that in doing so, the student bares his head, which is an expression of flaunting authority. Rashi. Others explain that when a student is serving his master, he must don phylacteries so the onlookers will know that he's a free man and a student. Because when you serve your master, if he wasn't wearing tefillin, people may think he's an eved, he's a servant, and not a slave. Therefore, a student who removes his phylacteries from his head indicates that he seeks to stop serving his teacher, which is a display of insubordination. That's what the Bar Sheva says. Some explain that since the custom during the era was to don phylacteries all day, remove them only when one needed to relieve himself, it is inappropriate for one to indicate his need to relieve himself in the presence of his teacher, or in this case, the king. Okay, so what did he say? He said in his heart that when he goes to the temple, they're going to dethrone him, and they're going to go back to the house of David. Why? What was the reason that they would dethrone him in the temple? So he explains. Amrei, he said like this. Gemir, we know the law is like this. The ein yeshiva ba'azara ela l'malchus beis David l'vad. The law. This is what got Yorovam. So what happens? Yorovam is the king of 10 tribes. Theoretically, he has the bulk of the people, bulk of the land. He has one problem: the temple is by the kingdom of Judah. So they're all going to have to go to the temple. What's the law? The law is that the only one king that could sit in the Azara, in the sanctuary, in the courtyard of the temple, are kings of David. Even the Rechavam Diasiv, he says the people are going to look and going to see that Rechavam is sitting, because he's the kings of David could sit in the courtyard. He can't sit; he has to stand. He's not allowed to sit. What's Savri? What are people going to say? Here's the king and here's the servant. They're going to see he's not a real king. Because if he was a real king, he would also be able to sit in the courtyard. But if he sits, that's rebellious. He's not allowed to sit. Then they're going to kill me. So what happened? And then they're going to and follow him immediately. They're going to go back and follow Rechavam. So he's going to lose his kingdom. He says the first Yom Tif, everyone's going to go to the temple. There's going to be basically the two kingdoms come together to the temple. One king is sitting because he's allowed to sit. How do we know that the king is allowed to sit? We learn it because David sat in front of God. But that's only for the house of David. We're going to learn the Rambam Paskins. Only the house of David is allowed to sit in the courtyard. I want to say something we've learned before. I don't know if you guys remember. We learned earlier in Sanhedrin that the kings of Israel were always a problem. So much so that the law is that you're not allowed to judge a king of Israel because their ego is strong. You're allowed to judge the kings of David because they have humility. David was humble. We've learned this law, that the kings of Israel are complicated. So either way, what did he do? But he has a problem. He needs to get the people to go away from the temple. He says they can't come to the temple. If they come to the temple, my rule is in danger. So he came up with an idea. He made 2 golden calves. Right? What do? If you can't make your own temple. He said to the Jewish people, no longer could you go to Yerushalayim. You don't have to. Eventually, they didn't let people go to Jerusalem. They put guards. These are the kings of Israel. That's it. What do? Build a golden calf. It worked once. He figured it'd work again. He put one of these statues in Bet Kel. That's an area. He put the other one in Dan, which is today. I don't know if it's the same Dan, but today Dan would be the Tel Aviv area. So therefore, no longer is a need to go to Jerusalem. If they don't go to Jerusalem, then they won't see that he's standing. They won't see that he's standing. So he will be able to rule with authority. What do we see from here? It wasn't that he had a burning desire for idol worship. He had an ego. That's what it says. He had an ego. And his ego got the better of him. Where do we see that? That's why the Gemara says that what was his sin? His sin was that he shamed Shlomo in public. Levayish, the Rashi says. Why? Is because he by shaming Shlomo in public was an ego thing. And that same ego was why he couldn't handle that they would go to the temple. And that's why he built the golden calves, led the Jewish people to serve idols, which led to him losing his portion in the world to come. Gemara, we learned, Rashi says, there's no verse that says that only the kings of Yehuda could sit, but we have the limud. The limud is from the fact that David sat. David sat in front of Hashem. Okay, the commentaries going over here. There's different opinions if David was allowed to sit there or not, but he did. He brings down the. Okay. Fundamentally, the idea, the sin is clear. I mean, it was an ego issue, and he led the Jewish people astray to protect his rule. Let's see what Rabbi Steindl says. Let's go a little further. The lacha that one may not sit in the temple courtyard is derived from the verse written with regard to the priest to stand and to serve. It says you have to stand when you serve. The lacha is that it is permitted for the kings of the house of David to sit in the courtyard is not derived from the Torah. Rather, it is derived from the fact that David sat before God. And the tradition is that it was in the temple. They sat before God in the temple courtyard. Although the temple wasn't up yet in David's times, but I guess the area was already sanctified. In the Jerusalem Talmud, there's a difference of opinion whether it is permitted for the kings of the house of David to sit in the courtyard. There it explains that Yorovam revolted during the sabbatical year, And on the festival of Sukkot that followed, there were on the festival of Sukkot that followed, there was an assembly, because that's what happens Shnas Hakel, and the king would read passages from the Torah before the people. Yorovam was concerned that he would be regulated to reading the Torah after Rechavam, king of Judah, indicating to all that he was on a lower level. So according to the Talmud Yishalmi does not accept that King David was able to sit in the courtyard. So it wasn't a sitting issue, but it was a Hakel year, which would make a little bit sense because it would give a little more time. It was a Hakel year Sukkos, and therefore the king of Yehuda would read the Torah first, which is what we did at Hakel, and therefore that would show that he was the main king. Here he brings down the halacha from the Rambam. Clearly, the Rambam goes according to our Talmud. It is permitted only for the kings of the house of David to sit in the temple courtyard. Rambam Sefer Avoda. Okay, let's go a little further. We have 10 minutes. My v'yotz, what did he do? How did he figure this out? You have to remember, again, he has to take people that were serving God, going to the temple, and convince them to serve idols. I mean, that's not easy, obviously. So he needed a plan. He was a smart guy. My v'yotz, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, what did Rabbi Yehuda say? Shehayishiv Rasha Eitzel Tzadik. He had wicked people that also disguise themselves as righteous people. That hasn't changed much, right? Righteous people that look like wicked people, vice versa. Shehayishiv Rasha Eitzel Tzadik. He put the wicked person next to the righteous person. Amar Lahu, he said to them, Chasmisu akol de avdina, are you ready to sign in everything I do? Means you have blind faith in me? You've made me the new king of the 10 tribes. Amar Lahu, hen, yes, we have blind faith in you. He was the student of Ahijah the Shilonite. He was a big scholar. Amar Lahu, he said, Malka ba'in l'mevei, I want to become king. Amar Lahu, hen, you could be king. Kol da'amin l'chu avdusu, everything I tell you, you'll do. Amar Lahu, hen. Will you even worship idols? You ready to listen to me? That's how much you're committed to me? So the righteous person said, God forbid, I would never worship an idol. So the wicked person sitting next to the righteous person would turn to the righteous person and said, do you think that Yorovam would advise you to serve idols? He's a great tzaddik. He was the most learned person of his generation. He's testing you to see how devoted you are. Would you say whatever he says? He's giving a very extreme case to see your dedication to him. And that was the trick. So they signed on the paper. When they signed on the paper, it was the Jewish people saw that the righteous people signed that you have to build the idols, and that was that. That was what he did. I'm not sure how that went down, but that's what happened. Eventually, he told them, after that whole thing, that they should agree to putting out an idols in Beis Kel. They signed on it. The wicked person said to the righteous person, do you really think a righteous, learned person like Yorovam would ask you to serve idols? He's testing you. Are you really dedicated to him? And therefore they signed to show their dedication, their commitment, right? They were overzealous. Again, nothing has changed. You manipulating the people and manipulating the narrative has not changed. It's going on right now as we sit here in Israel, in America. All these things have not changed. Wherever the side is, I'm not getting into the politics, but this idea of manipulating the people hasn't changed. So he said, sign on something, show your dedication. And therefore they fooled them. They all signed in the paper, thinking that they're just showing their unconditional commitment to the king. And as much as they tried to tell the people, they didn't mean it. They didn't help. It was too late. The paper was signed. So let's just go a little further, because I want to get into Ahijah Shilonite. His teacher, his Rebbe, the great Ahijah Shilonite, also made a mistake. V'chasim, he signed. How do we know that he signed? So it says like this. First of all, I want to just do a quick understanding who Ahijah Shilonite is. The Rambam, if you open up Maimonides, before in the Yad Chazaka, before he goes into the chain of tradition, so Rambam says like this: Uskeinim Rabim Kilum Yeshua. So Joshua received the tradition from Moshe, and the elders received it from Joshua. This is the Rambam quoting. V'kibel Eli min Askeinim, Eli the high priest received from the elders, Umi Pinchas and from Pinchas. Ushmuel prophet Samuel, Kibul mi Eli, he received from Eli. This is the tradition the Rambam quotes, Ubeis Dinoi, and the court of Eli. But David, King David, is the part of the chain of Masorah, of tradition. Kibul mishmuel Ubeis Dinoi, he's the receiver, no one else. David is the link of the tradition from Samuel. And who's the link from David? Ahijah Shilonite, Rambam says. Ahijah Shilonite is the link after David, going to the next. And who is Ahijah Shilonite, Rambam says? Miyotz Mitzrayim haya, V'levi haya. So you have to understand, we're talking about he was at least 400 years old. And he lived in Moses' time. V'shameh mi Moshe. He heard Torah from Moshe. He was young by Moshe. Nevertheless, when it comes to tradition, he only is part of the chain of tradition all the way later in King David's time. So it's the whole time of the judges and Eli and Samuel, and then he's the tradition, and then he's the one he's the prophet in the times of Solomon. On the side over here, if someone has time and I can go into it, it goes into the complication. The Barbanel kind of tries to figure it out. The Ravid, though, trying to figure out how could it be? It means he's 400 years old. And why would he only be in tradition by David's times? Why wouldn't he be tradition by Moses' time? Some opinions say that he saw Amram, the father of David. It means he was 60 years old by the time he had to be at least 60 years old by the time Moshe passed away. So they go into the reason. It's not so simple. With the Rambam, we hear from here, the conclusion is that tradition has nothing to do with being a student. You could be a student for 400 years, but your time to be part of the tradition of Torah only happens later. But what's the point of all this? The Ahijah Shilonite is part of the tradition of Torah. He was from the people who saw Moshe Rabbeinu, Rambam says. Nevertheless, he also got fooled by Yorovam. Not only did he get fooled by Yorovam, he's the teacher of Yorovam. And he signed. Now, most people say he did not sign to build idols. He signed that he should be king. But that signature alone led the Jewish people. How do we know that he signed? What's the proof? So the Gemara says the proof that we know that Ahijah Shilonite signed. The Hayehu Tzadik Rabahava. Later, Yehu is another king of Israel. He ends up killing the house of Achav. He ends up and he was righteous. He was anointed. Yehu was anointed as king. He was also a righteous person. Shneimar vayem Hashem al Yehu yan asher hativaisi lasas hayosh beinei chol asher b'levavasi asisa leveis Achav b'nei revim yesh v'cha kis Yisrael. Because you did what I asked you to the house of Achav, who we'll learn about later, another horrible king of Israel. Therefore, you're going to be the king. So he was a tzaddik. Then it says, he didn't continue in the ways of God, Yehu, Elikei Yisrael, the Lord of Israel, his whole heart, he didn't get rid of the idols that Yorovam put up. So it doesn't make sense. Why would he have, if he was righteous, why would he have kept the idols of Yorovam? So it says, Rashi says, Rashi doesn't learn, like I said. Other opinions don't agree that Ahijah Shilonite signed about Avodah Zarah, but Rashi says he signed because he wanted. Yorovam was testing him to see how committed he was. Now, Ahijah Shilonite was the authority of Torah. He was the chain of tradition. So if he signed, imagine the power that had on the people. It says God trusted him. He was a tzaddik. Nevertheless, he didn't do right. What happened? What went wrong with Yehu? We're going to see. From here we see what happened. He saw the signature of Ahijah Shilonite on the piece of paper. He said, Ahijah Shilonite is such a great tzaddik, part of the tradition of Torah. If he signed, that means that the idols have to be here. And therefore he also fell astray. It was the signature. From here we learn that it was that Ahijah Shilonite signed on the piece of paper. I'm going to stop here. I'm just going to read this. We'll have to continue mid-story next week. But what's the Rabbi Steindl says, the Ramah explains that Ahijah did not endorse the pronunciation, the pronouncement, even to worship idols. Rather, he was among those who signed the document crowning Yorovam as king. His error was that he did not stipulate that his agreement was conditional. He should have said, I'm only agreeing Yorovam should be king if he stays with Torah. Yorovam will be king provided that it does not deviate from the path of God. As God said to Yeshua, be strong and of great courage, and guard and do according to all the Torah. That's what God told Yeshua, the successor of Moshe. Ahijah Shilonite gave a blank check to Yorovam. I signed that he's king, without conditioning it to his behavior. Others say that all kind of other things. We'll have to backtrack next week. That the Jewish that Yorovam wanted to take the people out of Eretz Yisrael, so they shouldn't have to go to. His ego was so part of his downfall that he had all kind of issues to try to figure out to make sure that he remains king. And what happened? He brought down not only himself, he brought down the Jewish people. It led to the exile of the 10 tribes, not around anymore. I mean, it shows you that a small issue of one individual's ego and how that led to the destruction of multiple of the Jewish people. All right, Chevra, sorry for getting a little out of the box in this class, but to give a little understanding of the story. And Laila Tov, Bez Hashem, I think we can still learn next week as well. Take care. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.